Many of you know that my name is Nicholas Curran. I am the founder and CEO of Numbers for Nonprofits. I've been doing this about 20 years. Hung out my shingle in August of '04. I've had some ups and downs with business structure and name and all of that, but been serving nonprofits pretty exclusively since 2006. Joining me today is Kristin Rucinski. She is one of our nonprofit consultants, joined our team about a year ago. She and I had a client service provider relationship prior to her joining Numbers for Nonprofits. She was the former executive director at the Road Home, Dane County, and then took a little bit of a break and then came and joined me, and has been doing interim work for clients like the Road Home and right now affordable dental care. Kristin, anything else you want to add?
I think I would just add that I've had the opportunity to get exposed to a lot of more nonprofits while I've been working at Numbers for Nonprofits, but most of my examples and what I say today will still be related to the Road Home just because I was there for 20 years in different capacities. So sorry if it seems like I'm mostly talking about that agency in my examples, but I will try to fit in other stuff here and there. And then I think the other thing, just as we're doing some intros for those of you who weren't on yet, Nick said that the two of us would be acting as experts in this topic today. And I just want to reiterate that probably nothing here is too earth-shattering that we're going to be sharing, but we know that sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or 5 times to hear something to kind of like really then implement it in the agencies that you work with. We're all busy, and sometimes we have good intentions to do some things, and then it just sort of falls down the priority list. So hopefully you hear something here that kind of re-energizes you and gets you to actually do something that maybe you've been meaning to do already. So that's my little words of wisdom there. And so what the day or the morning will look like is really the two of us will be talking for about 35 to 40 minutes. But like Nick said, this is always more enriching when we have more participation from the audience. So please, jump in, ask questions, share your own examples, because again, we are not like necessarily experts in this. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A if that doesn't come out throughout the presentation. And then, like Nick said, we'll have the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card. And I'm sure he'll be talking about the next breakfast with benefits, which I don't actually know what it is. So Nick or Rebecca,
I've got it.
we'll do
I've
that.
got it.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
to start off here, besides our introductions, we were going to do a quick poll. Becca, are you going to throw that up there? We're hoping to know who of you are executive directors, which of you might be board members, are you not other nonprofit staff or other interested attendees? So if you could just take a quick moment, might frame some of how we approach the next 55 minutes with you all. Okay.
Great.
All right. If
Thank
you
you
can
for,
see,
yeah, I was
yeah,
going to say,
thanks.
people in the chat, thank you for if you're kind of explaining what your other nonprofit staff means or other interested attendee. That's helpful to kind of know who's in the room.
A couple people had a few trouble voting. Sorry about that. We'll see how we fix that down the road. Awesome.
All
Couple
right.
more minutes with that.
Great breadth of people. Nice
Yeah.
to nice to see.
Go ahead, Kristin. You can kick off this part.
Okay. So this hopefully won't be a surprise, but I think the most important thing that a nonprofit could really um, kind of have as its guiding star is a really strong, clear, concise, and compelling mission statement, right? I really see this as no matter what sort of decision you're making, whether you have to make hard budget decisions and you have to cut something, or programmatic decision, or even as you're recruiting, people for your board of directors, like people need to understand the mission statement, have to agree with it, have to know kind of what that guiding star is. Um, this is something, in my opinion, that shouldn't be changed too often, but there are times where you might have sort of a shift in your strategic programming and in your mission. And so I think it is essential to at least review this every couple of years as a board and as a staff and change it if it's necessary, right? But don't just keep changing it year after year because you want that consistency and you want everybody, working toward that same goal. But there are definitely times where maybe you've started a new program.
Kristin, we lost you got muted.
You're good now.
But now am I not sharing?
Correct.
I can see the PowerPoint.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Sorry, I can't. I don't know when I got muted, but mission statements are critical. Nick, start talking while I try to get this going.
Yeah, no, you were saying all the right things. North Star shouldn't be changed too often, but does provide that, direction for the organization. And then moving down, vision statement defines what the success looks like for the organization in the long term. It's not meant to be a catchy tagline. It's really, where do we want to be? Who do we want to impact? Who are we serving? Those sorts of questions getting answered as we go. One of the examples that I'm thinking of recently of an organization that, was mission and vision led to a really big thing. And this is just one example. The community's full of them, but, we got to work very closely and intimately with Centro Hispano as they went through their capital campaign and put up this wonderful building that is just, I don't know if any of you've been over there, but it is just this wonderful space that just exudes like helping people and bringing people together, community. They've got a kitchen where, the people can, bring together for food and talk about the issues that are affecting their community. So, that in my mind, and I don't want to give Curran sole credit for that, but, she has just been, at the front of that organization. And, the fact that they have that mission and that vision, I think was critical in establishing that new building and people's willingness in the community to give to that cause. So something that I was, got to watch front and center, being just a small part of it, making sure that the accounting for the capital campaign was all in order. But that one resonates with me specifically.
All right, I'm back.
And
then I see a question in the chat, so I'll just jump in and take that.
Yep.
So Jason asked, kind of what's the difference between, or why did I say different than a catchy tagline? Again, my examples are often with the road home. So a vision statement. So the road home works with trying to end family homelessness. So the vision statement would sort of be everybody has housing, right? Like that's like the end goal is kind of the vision, right? Like we have ended homelessness in Dane County. The road home often uses a tagline of every child deserves a home. That's what I would call like a catchy tagline. Kind of tugs at the heartstrings a little bit. but every child deserves a home isn't a vision, because the vision would actually be every child like has a home. So that's kind of what I meant by different. Like the vision really should be the end game. Hopefully that makes sense, Jason. Any other questions on mission, vision? The other thing that's not included here that I really think is part of a strong foundation is having really understanding your organization's values, and hiring people around that, getting board members around that, really just living out your mission around those values. And so I just wanted to add that in here as well. And the last thing I'll just say, Nick used Centro as a good example of their strategic plan. I can't stress enough, and I know you all know this, but this is one of those things that I feel like we know and then don't do it, is that I firmly believe that a strategic plan has to be a living document, right? It needs to be updated. It needs to be looked at. You can't take all the time and resources to develop this plan and then it sits on a shelf and it's never looked at. Things are changing all the time in the world, and especially in the nonprofit world, or you might have new opportunities or new threats, or new challenges, either internally to your organization or externally in the community that you're, trying to make change in. So I just can't stress enough, and I know that this is one that, often just doesn't get reviewed and updated and sort of evaluated as often as maybe it should. So if you're in that camp, maybe that's your to-do.
So just before we move on, would anybody have any experiences they wanted to share around how their mission and vision process was, was smooth or was bumpy? Did you involve an implementer or a outside party to help facilitate anything? Anybody have anything to share on, the mission, vision, strategic plan, and how their organization knocked it out of the park? Or maybe here were some things that we learned through our process that might be willing to share with others. All right. Hearing nothing at this time, we'll move on.
All right, this next section is on governance and leadership. I think it was about a year ago I did a whole session just on like board governance. So a lot of these topics really could be entire sessions, right? We're kind of talking about the tip of the iceberg here, and then either together or on your own, we could, dive in after this hour together. But around governance and leadership, right, I think I've talked with many nonprofits, and finding good board members, willing board members who understand governance and aren't just trying to like micromanage the day-to-day operations, it's difficult. So just really, I would just encourage everybody, I saw in the poll that there were a lot of board members here, so thank you. Obviously, you're committed to being the best board member you could be by taking the time on your own time to join this presentation. And if you are on the executive director side, working with the board and helping to recruit board members, the one thing, again, I'm sure everybody knows this, but then in practice, it can be difficult because sometimes you just take whoever is willing to be a board member, but really trying to have a diverse set of folks on your board, both from the skills that they could bring, from their perspectives. You don't want all finance people on your board. You don't want all attorneys. You don't want it all needs to be diversified. And I'm a big proponent of having term limits. Again, just to get some fresh blood, people can do 3 to 6 years, have a great impact on an organization. But then I think it's good for various reasons that we don't have time to get into, to make sure that you're getting different board members on board as well. And probably the biggest maybe point of contention sometimes is having those clear roles and responsibilities between the executive director and the board. Making sure you're not, overlapping, making sure that you know who's doing what and who's holding who accountable. All of that is extremely important. The thing that comes to mind the most with this sort of relationship between the board and leadership, to me, just like one huge example to talk about, and I think I even touched on this a year ago, is succession planning, right? So in the majority of nonprofits, the board is sort of in charge of hiring, evaluating, terminating the executive director. And so I just can't tell you how many times when if the executive director leaves voluntarily or involuntarily, just the lack of planning for what comes next, it's rampant. So I'm not pointing fingers. It's just, again, often everybody just thinks, oh, we have this great ED, everything's going well, they'll never leave. Well, that's not the case. Usually, people don't usually stay forever. So please just be considering a succession plan if you're a board member, and even if you are in that leadership role, starting to think about and documenting things that you do that somebody else would have to step in and take over if you somehow, were gone tomorrow. So that is sort of my sticking point on the governance and leadership. Together, just continue, I think over time, sometimes this is easier if the ED has been there for a couple of years or more, but continuing just to build trust and transparency through communication is just huge. I always say that I was really fortunate at the Road Home to have a good board, but I also know that a lot of that came because I would do things that I said I would do. I would be transparent. So it's really a two-way street of both the board and the leadership developing that good working relationship. And the last thing here on this, again, no surprise, but I would really encourage you, if you can, to invest in training, both for your staff members, but also board members, right? Again, a lot of board members, they're engaged, they want to do good things, and some of them just don't have that training and the sort of the knowledge of what board governance really means. So if you can, try to invest in that as much as you can.
Yeah,
Nick,
a couple things that I'll add here. Recruiting for board members has to be a continuous process. Don't wait till, people's terms are nearly coming up. You want to be in a recruiting mode, just like you want to be recruiting, for good employees, constantly. Be on the lookout for those people. Have your job descriptions of what a board member is supposed to be, what they're supposed to do, what are the giving requests that you might be asking of them, whether that's actual dollars or opening doors, being very clear with the people what the expectations are for them as they come into their roles. And then on the leadership side, don't make succession planning like adversarial. It is so crucial to have a nice transfer of power at an organization. I've had, again, a personal experience with a client of ours, longtime client of ours, Colonial Club, who's longtime executive director. This is all public knowledge, so I'm not sharing anything out of turn. Bob Power gave notice probably 12, if not 18 months ago, which allowed the board lots of time to look for and do the proper search. Ultimately, they settled on an amazing internal candidate who's been there as long as I've been alive. But this transition is allowed to go much smoother. They're going to overlap then for 3 to 6 months, and Kristin can speak to that a little bit about how important that time is with new people coming in so that they can learn the ropes, that they can absorb knowledge from the person who's there. That's been a critical piece of what she did at the Road Home as an interim executive director when they brought Michael in. So that's can't be undersold for the success of organizations long term. Is just how those succession plans go.
And yeah, before we move on, there are a couple comments in the chat. I really like the idea of a purpose statement along with mission statement. Thank you for that, Christina. And there was something else that I saw. Jason had a question about sort of how familiar do we think board members need to be with the organization? Again, kind of going back to if they really believe in the purpose or the mission of that organization and they align with that organization's values, I don't think they need to be extremely familiar. I mean, they have to know the ins and outs, but you don't need to know every detail to be a good governing board member, right? So it's sort of a tricky question, and it might come off wrong, but I don't actually think you need to know that much about the organization. As long as you have those sort of guiding principles, I think you could be a good board member and you could then like learn more about the organization in your years there. But I don't, if you have somebody that understands board governance, but they're newer to the organization, I wouldn't wait and say, oh, you can't be a board member for a couple of years until you are really familiar with us. I would take the good board member first. That's my opinion. But
On the training side for board members, I would say, one approach you could consider would be, some of the more experienced board members that are maybe rolling off. You could use those individuals' experience as part of the overall process. You can certainly hire this out. I know that I've had boards ask just on the financial aspects of the organization to come and sit with the board members for 25, 30 minutes as part of one of the board meetings to train. So that's something that you could consider for any of our clients or any nonprofits on the call. Casey Okers, thank you for your suggestion there. Boardsource.org as another option. Kristin, do you have any other?
I was familiar with BoardSource. There are some, I don't know. I don't know if they do them locally anymore, but I know there are some. Let's follow up on that one. I know there were some local organizations that used to do some of this, and at a very low cost or free. But I don't feel like I've seen those lately as much. So
United Way pops to mind, like they maybe
that's one
done.
that I thought of, but I'm not sure they're still doing those.
Okay.
All right, Nick, this is your baby here, financial management.
Woo! Completely biased. Let's talk accounting or budgeting. In all seriousness, I know this is the work that we do, but I truly believe, and it's why I'm passionate about the work that we do, that an organization needs to sit down and understand its numbers, at least annually, putting together, with the information that you have, a budget that is ideally balanced. Or if you have capital needs for your organization, that you budget a surplus. If you're servicing debt, budgeting a surplus, but you need to look at your numbers. You need to understand it. It often starts with, your people. 85, 90% of nonprofit budgets typically are personnel. That number's maybe a little high, but, understanding who you need on the team to fulfill the mission, purpose, vision of the organization. Then you need to understand how are those people paid for, whether that's government grants, whether that's unrestricted giving, whether that's service income, whether that's fundraising. How are you going to make sure that these people are funded in order to do the wonderful work that they do? And then, of course, you've got to consider overhead, rent and office and HR, accounting, etc. So laying that all out once a year, and then on top of that, monitoring it throughout the year, so that you can see how are you performing against it. Is anything not meeting expectations? Do we have to make changes if needed? So this is getting good financials each month thereafter, once you've set that budget and looking at it to understand, hey, are we hitting our goals? Let me see here. Projections. So as I said, you start with a budget. We think that that's static. You don't change a budget. A budget is your first blush of how is the year going to play out. Then you shift to a projection, which says, okay, now we've had change in personnel. We've added a grant. We've moved locations. We're building a new building. Then you take what you started with and you adjust for those assumptions, and you look to see how that plays out in your statement of financial position, and primarily cash, because cash is king. Clear, concise, compelling just means, understand like what are you putting into your buckets of expenses, into your income accounts, and defining what is there, so that when you go to analyze it, that this makes sense, and anything that's not there that isn't should be looked at closer. Monitoring, I kind of alluded to that, tracking your performance against your budget. Documented policies and procedures, we've had a lot of requests for those. more so than ever before. It seems like in the last couple years. Um, when it comes to fundraising and diversifying your revenue streams, uh, something to be aware of. We're talking a lot with nonprofits this coming budget season about those who are losing federal dollars. It's a big issue. We consider it like, almost a fiscal cliff. And so how are you going to replace those dollars? Are you going to dip into reserves to weather the storm for a little bit while you get your footing? Some people are looking at bringing in new development people in order to help with the diversification of revenue streams, and that takes time. We've got a couple different nonprofits that I can think of that are in that boat where they've strategically put in place a new person, but that person needs time to cultivate new relationships to get those revenue streams coming in.
And just to clarify, when Nick said losing federal dollars, a lot of organizations saw an influx of funds from the COVID pandemic that are now ending, whether that was kind of coming, a lot of it came from the state, but started as federal dollars. And then that's where we're seeing a lot of organizations that had, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 the last couple of years that is now just going away. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. The other thing that I would add here, again, kind of, I guess it would go under the financial monitoring part, would just be to really check your internal controls and make sure, again, that could be a whole probably hour conversation, but making sure that you're having good internal controls around, for example, the same person isn't approving a check and writing a check and signing the check and and mailing the check, right? You want to make sure that you have some separation of duties around that, making sure that if you have a finance committee on the board, that they're having oversight over credit card statements, for example, if there are several staff that have credit cards. So just, again, tip of the iceberg is just looking at your financial internal controls. And if anybody has questions on that, we could follow up after the fact.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up from my perspective. If you are a calendar year end right now and you have not started a budgeting conversation at the board level internally, I would welcome an opportunity to sit down with you and talk about that. Again, critical that you're thinking about it so that you can do the wonderful work that you all do in the community.
Okay. Operational efficiency. So to me, this is you want to have methods in place to look for effectiveness, but also like efficiency. So I think a couple slides later, we actually talk about, probably, to be honest, a little bit more on the effectiveness part. But things that come to mind here would be, for me, like if you have new staff kind of regularly starting at your nonprofit, the onboarding process for them is something that comes to mind for me as far as like operational efficiency. Like the more you could train people and give people upfront information and have that just all in a box with a bow on it for them when they first start, will just make things so much more efficient as time goes on, or they're not constantly asking questions or looking back or, where's this? How do I find this? So that's one that I think it took, when I was at the Road Home, it took us a while to kind of get to the spot where we're at now with our onboarding process for new staff, but I think that's a really big one. Things that just happen quarterly or annually, or that you have to have, has to happen a couple times a year. Get in some sort of, figure out how you can make that more efficient. Is it a spreadsheet? Is it documenting something? Like, it'll all depend on your organizations, but I'm sure that there are things that people are doing over and over again, and they're sort of reinventing the wheel each time instead of just having a process for it and making things more efficient. So I would encourage you just to kind of pause and stop and think about, there has to probably be one thing that you could do this week or this month to make things more efficient, both for yourself and for your team. And then Nick, I think you're going to talk more on the tech side.
Yeah, on the tech side, of course, this has a bit of an accounting slant to it, but, we're shifting a lot of our clients from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, and the efficiencies in that product Things like bank feeds. You can pay bills through QBO. You can process payroll through QBO, but be cautious. Any and all of those things that make it easier for you to do a specific aspect of your operations, in this case, accounting. We like things like Bill.com and Divvy that also sync into QuickBooks Online and centralize your expense spending to monitor, have a better handle on that. Looking at things in the banking world, like, uh, we've got friends at Park Bank on the call. So, they've got an ICS product that automatically sweeps money out and protects you at the FDIC limit, and with all of this back behind the scenes kind of legal arrangements with other financial institutions, but it's automated and you don't have to think about it. And it does help you make a little bit more money on your deposits than you might otherwise have made. Making sure that you have an ability to take stock donations. Appreciated stock is something that people use for financial planning reasons as individuals. And so you want to be able to have a mechanism for that. There are organizations in town that can help with that, but there are fees associated with that. So you might want to look into just opening a brokerage account that can take stock donations, and then you want to have a policy on top of that that immediately sells that, so you're not holding it and experiencing potential market fluctuations. Little things like bringing a remote scanner to your office from your bank financial institution so that you don't have to physically go to the bank. It can be a huge time saver, especially if you have a lot of check volume at your organization. Similarly, there are lockbox opportunities. If you want to just have it so that everything related to donations goes to a financial institution. Of course, there are costs to this, but again, in the spirit of efficiency, you can have your checks go there, it's scanned, it's deposited for you. You get a file that then can be uploaded into your donor management system to generate your correspondence with your donors. So all of those things come to mind when it comes to technology. And this one is just, if we've got anybody on the call that has a website that does not have a donate now button front, center, easily recognizable when you go to the first page of your landing page of your website, please take the time to do that. I'm still amazed, like, the number of times I go out to a website to consider a donation and I have to dig for it. But I know we want to promote the mission, the vision, the purpose of our organization, but boy, we know we got to ask money too. Ask for money, I'm sorry. So anybody doing anything fun or that they've had success with on the efficiency side with technology or program management? Anybody do anything that they're really happy with on the donor management side as far as automating anything there? All right, this must mean you're all soaking this in really intently.
Val put in a note that people could reach out to her about Park Bank's nonprofit program, because I know you mentioned them a couple times in what you just said, Nick.
Yep.
Thanks, Val.
Thanks, Val.
Okay, communication and outreach. Okay, this time we really do want people to engage in the chat. So if you could just quick, whatever pops up into your mind. I think most of the people on the call are in Dane County, but just quick put in the chat an organization that comes to your mind, mostly because in Dane County, who's doing things because you I tend to see them a lot. Like, there's good marketing, good visibility. Yeah, I mean, I have a few that come to my mind that I just feel have the right appropriate amount of times they're hitting my inbox. Not too often. Not
Mentoring Positives, Will Green. Yep, good organization out there helping youth. Big Brothers, Big Sisters. We got days listed. Heartland Farm, the river, big new building going up. We're helping them with that. Boys and Girls Clubs. There's one in Fond du Lac, Latino Chamber of Commerce, the Y, Urban Triage, Centro, Madison Reading Project, Urban League. Great examples.
And then I guess the next question, maybe this might be a little harder to just put in the chat, but if you can, like, is it social media? Is it emails? Is it their website? Are you seeing that? Are you hearing them on the radio? Like, what is it that made you put those great organizations in the chat that you listed?
We've got billboards being used, social media, word of mouth. It's a lot of social media.
There's no right answer to your question, Anne. I have my own personal preferences, and if I see what I think is too many, I start to not read them. That's a personal preference, unless
Consistent
anybody has a.
messaging. Yeah, consistent messaging, podcasts, quote unquote yard signs, given to supporters.
Okay, these are good, and hopefully gives the organizations on this call some ideas of maybe how to get your brand out there more and your name out there more. I saw a lot of social media podcasts, I think, are becoming more popular. So please, take a look in the chat if you didn't write anything, or even if you did, and maybe take some of those ideas with you. What else do we want to say about marketing and PR from our perspective, Nick?
Another name that I think of when I think of brand awareness as United Way in our community. I think that they, with their agenda for change and, full disclosure, I am a donor to United Way. So I see them constantly talking about the issues that they're trying to face or to solve for, and how they approach those issues. And they've gotten huge support, bringing in people of influence and to their board and to their inner circle. So being able to have that exposure into the community with all of those different people and all of that mission, like, really resonates with me when I think of this area.
And then the other notes on the slide are just kind of around transparency. I think this is important from my perspective, is as you're just trying to get the community on board with what you're doing, and that they should support your organization in whatever way, whether that's financially or as a volunteer or as a board member or just as an ambassador, word of mouth, saying good things about you. I do think it's just important to be as transparent as possible. So having things like your 990 on your website, if you're not registered, and put as much information as you can on GuideStar and Charity Navigator, which are websites that donors and the public often could look at to kind of quote unquote evaluate your organization. And the last thing here is, at least what I've learned from many conversations with donors and with just the community at large, is that they really want to hear both what's going well and what's not going well. Like, what are your challenges at your nonprofit? If you're just out there kind of continuously giving this, everything's great sort of story, I think they know that that's probably not true. Like, every organization has challenges. Again, whether those are internal challenges or external challenges, right? So again, using the road home as an example, like, an external challenge that we would see are just rising rent costs, the lack of affordable housing. Like, yes, we're trying to make an impact on those, but those are just sort of external challenges that in a way we don't have a lot of control over. And people want to know, like, what are those challenges? What are the roadblocks? What are the barriers? So that's just sort of my I'm just gonna harp on it, over and over. Like, people want to know both the successes and the challenges. Don't try to fluff it all and make everything seem great. Okay, what's next? Volunteer and staff engagement. I know N for N just had a staff volunteer engagement at Habitat for Humanity, which is one that I think utilizes volunteers really well. I was not there. Nick, do you want to talk a little just personal perspective on that experience?
Yeah, I've had involvement with Habitat for quite some time. For me, for a guy that sits at his desk, most of my day, it was great to get out and, use a hammer, use a saw, use things that I don't get to use. And they really do a good job of being welcoming and, utilizing people. I mean, these houses primarily go up with volunteer labor. So this is just one example of an organization that uses volunteers very extensively. The culture that they have around the organization, one of their office locations has a very nice break room that welcomes the volunteers. They have soda and snacks and everything. This is for their restore on the west side, and so they've got lots of they're investing in that volunteerism in this particular case. Now, Kristen and I have talked a little bit more about this. Like, there are other organizations that just don't have good volunteer opportunities, but it might be something that you need to look into somehow, some way, because it does engage people into, to want to maybe give as well as of their time, their treasure as well. So, Kristen, you gave an example of something the Road Home used to do, and where once that went away, that became a little bit of a challenge to promote, what's the word, involvement with the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key here, again, I know this is probably something we all know, is that the volunteer opportunity has to be meaningful, both for the
Hmm.
volunteer and for the organization, right? So, I mean, there have been times where I think we have felt, almost forced to come up with an idea, a volunteer project, because we hear from a business that they have 10 staff that want to come out on Thursday at 2 o'clock and do something. So it's like, okay, well, you could paint this wall, or you could pick some weeds in our yard, or things that are just sort of in a way like made up. And so I just can't stress enough the importance of like meaningful volunteer engagement. It has to be a good use of their time, but and also it has to be like actually helping your organization in a way that's respectful to maybe people that you're serving, respectful to your staff's time, etc. So like Nick said, sometimes it's just really hard to come up with these ideas, but the more you can engage volunteers in the community, again, the more they're feeling connected to your purpose, the more they're talking to their friends and families about, oh, I just volunteered at ABC organization, had a great time, and did you know this? And it just all, it all travels. Again, word of mouth and people's experience. Like Nick said, often then volunteers will become donors, and that's not always like the main reason why we want volunteers, but that's a fact, right? A volunteer is often a donor, and a donor is often a volunteer. So I just would encourage you, if you don't have like a volunteer program set up, to try to think about it. And it's really important to, just again, like recruit, train, and then retain those volunteers just like you would your staff or your board members. This is something that I think is really hard, especially if you don't have like a dedicated kind of like a volunteer manager or like a position to this, because then
Hmm.
it's kind of like nobody takes this on if it's not somebody's dedicated role. But um, again, it really does help the organization in a variety of ways if you could figure out how to engage volunteers. And then we also talk about staff engagement a little bit in here as well, just, to make sure, staff are there to do a job, but you want to make sure that they're engaged in the organization and the community, that they know how they could sort of quote unquote advance within the organization, feel included in everything that the organization is doing. I know Nick's great at investing in staff development and ongoing education, at N for N. I know we really prioritize that at the Road Home. What else do you want to add there, Nick, kind of about staff development?
Yeah, I mean, I can only, I mean, the most recent example does come from N for N, where we laid out a very clear career path progression. Took some time, took a lot of input from staff, but we got there. And now I think people can see, hey, you can come in as a support, move to a lead, become a team lead, director, etc. So it's very clear for people who want to see this as a career, what the path is going to be for them um, when they walk in the door. Um, one of the notes that Kristin you have here is also like, who might the next leaders in the organization be, and how is that going to be part of the overall succession planning? Um, do you have people who need to go on a leadership track, and and that training is completely different. From my own experiences, I can share, like, people who are good at doing a particular job might not be a good manager of people who do that job. And so there needs to be a conversation about that. And then there needs to be, skills training to try and fill that if that person still is interested in, being a leader of people. Because it is, repeating myself, it's two completely different things. Being good at something being good at something and managing people to do that good stuff. And then clearly foster and supportive inclusive environment for all staff, whether that takes the form of, specific DEI, initiatives, forming committees around that. We have that at our organization right now and are trying to do better at everything in that regard. Back to the budgeting side of all of this, making sure that there's actual money to be able to do these things. Kristin and I have had conversations with lots of executive directors who would love to spend an hour or two with people like Kristin, just to serve as a sounding board or as a mentor. And this isn't about money or selling this, but like, there isn't always a budget to do that for nonprofits. And so how do you, if that's important for the organization to be able to support staff, you've got to find the dollars to do that sort of stuff.
All right, I think this is the last one, and then we have a little summary. So this is around just, measuring your impact and evaluating what you're doing, and really the most important is just to continuously be improving, right? So it's amazing how many people, especially like in a specific program, maybe of an organization, I'll ask, well, what would success look like? And people can't just automatically have an answer to that. So really think about what success looks like in every position in your organization, in every program, your organization as a whole. And not only what does success look like to you, but also, again, if you're serving people, like what's the impact on the community, on the people that you're actually serving? How are you going to measure that? And just continuous, in a way, trial and error might not be the best term, but you try something and then you have to assess it, you have to evaluate it, and if it's not working, don't keep doing it, right? And just making sure that you're measuring from different levels. Again, one example that I can easily think of at the road home is not only looking at data from the road home, like what we're doing, but actually looking at the community data. So there are multiple organizations that work to end homelessness, and so the road home could be doing one thing, Porchlight, Salvation Army, YWCA, all these organizations. It was really important to me when I was there to look at the community data to figure out then where maybe we could have the biggest impact, or if the length of homelessness is growing in our community, then what can we do to shorten that length, which might be different than how could we keep people in housing, right? So like kind of looking at the community data as well as your own individual organizational data, I think is really important, and something that might not be as either readily available or apparent to be thinking about. How about, Nick, I think you really appreciate Clean Wisconsin here.
Another organization that we work with, Clean Wisconsin, they've really invested in the science and legal side of their organization, and they collect tons and tons of data around CAFOs and PFAS, and just the fact that I even know what those acronyms are is says something. But they take this data, they come up with a recommendation on how they can improve or fix that, what's resulting in the environment, and then they go and they do their government relations and take the time to sit down with people who can impact, have a positive change on those data points. You know, I get their newsletters. That data is constantly in their newsletters. So I feel more educated on how the information that they're collecting and how that impacts the environment and what they're doing as a result of that. I find that to be hugely helpful in my understanding, and I think it has an impact on how they are affecting the environment overall.
All right, we made it.
We made it.
So, so the recap, and I hope most people can see the slides. I see that somebody's hasn't been able to see the slides this whole time, so I apologize for that. But
Yeah, and we'll send them out.
we'll
There's
send them
nothing,
out.
you know, as we said at the very beginning, there's nothing proprietary here. It's a lot of good reminders on, you know, what a strong nonprofit looks like to us. So we'll do this recap. We'll take a few final questions, and then we'll let you all on with your day.
Yeah, I mean, the recap is essentially just sort of the topics that we went over, and again, I think we should really just pause for 10 seconds to let you guys think about which, if any of these, you think you could do something in the next week, month, quarter, year. But again, something that's been on your mind, you're like, oh, I should really do this, but you just haven't done it. Again, whether that's around your kind of your foundational tools, those values, your mission statement, mission purpose, strategic plan, looking around your board governance, looking around how your board and your leadership team work together. Do you have good internal controls, budgets? Are you monitoring the budget? How could you be more efficient with your programming and with any technology? How are you communicating with the outside world? Is social media? Is it podcasts? Is it updating your website? How do you keep people engaged, whether that's volunteers or staff? How are you really evaluating what you're doing, right? Which is the whole purpose of you're trying to make some change, no matter what your organization is working toward. You're trying to improve something for somebody or for some system. And so is that working, and how do you need to adjust? So really just kind of think about something that you could take from this and do.
Tom, one question from Tom Pop here. Describe some good ways to get feedback from donors and supporters about their perception of how we can do a better job. Well, I know for N, this was probably, it could be almost 12 months ago now. We did a survey. We sent out 5 to 10 questions and asked questions that were relevant to them. This may sound a little bit hokey, but you know, Chat GPT is being used for more and more, like just setting up some initial framework of things. So instead of Googling, how do I get feedback from donors or supporters, you can go into Chat GPT and say, come up with a survey for me to get feedback from donors and supporters, and use that as a base. Clearly don't just take it verbatim, but I'm seeing a lot of people having success using Chat GPT as a base for doing stuff like this, Tom. Kristin, do you have any past experiences,
Sure. I
or
mean,
anybody on the call, frankly?
sure. So Tom's, I think his question is more about like, well, he used the word donors and supporters. So I can't stress enough, this kind of goes into fundraising tips and tools, but the actual, like when you're a donor, the actual ask for money and that's like a transaction, right? Like I'm going to ask you for money and you're going to give money, and that's just a small slice of donor cultivation, right? So when somebody gives, you want to thank them, and then you want to like be talking with them all throughout the year. And that's where I really lean on donor preferences. Some donors want to go out for lunch once a year and get an update on your organization, and that would just be a natural conversation where you could ask for feedback on things. Some people like all email communication. Some people want to go, like I'm going to a donor's house tomorrow with Michael, the new ED at the Road Home, who's on the call. I really like kind of lean on donor preferences, but then through those conversations, whether that's at a lunch or at their house or via email, like it's just like talking to them throughout the year is just where you organically could say, hey, what did you think about that? Or oh, were you at our event last week? Do you have any feedback for us? Or, this is happening externally. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on how the road home might have an impact on it? Just the donation part is such a small slice of really the conversations that you're having throughout the year. So I just think like through those conversations is where you can get that feedback from donors and supporters about how the organization is doing and maybe what they could be doing better. I hope that made sense. Sort of a tangent on fundraising a little bit.
That's great. Any parting thoughts from anybody? Anything that they want to share? Lessons learned? Successes from the past 12 months?
I do want to say that Kristin, getting to know her, being in my role has been phenomenal. I can't even tell, you can't even put a value on like what I've learned from her. Just the encyclopedic, deep, vast, gargantuan knowledge, just everything that you can get. Like, I wouldn't have uprooted my family to work for any other organization if they didn't have everything in place. When you talk about onboarding, when you talk about, I mean, especially someone who's new to the area, who doesn't know anything about the area, that's very, very, very important. So it's something that's needed, and it's just a blessing. So I know Chris and I will continue to work together after she completely transitions out. But I've really gained a friend, and I just really wanted to say that to you without getting too emotional. So I'm going to mute now.
Thanks, Michael. So yeah, if we could all just take a minute, maybe. So Michael's been the Road Home's executive director since August 5th. He moved here, uprooted his family, like he said, so new to the area, new to the Road Home, and so glad that he's here. So I've had the opportunity to sort of work with him on his onboarding since I had experience at the Road Home, and it's I think gone really well so far. So thank you for the words, Michael, and I'm glad you're here in Dane County.
So we've got our contact information here. We're happy to meet with any and all of you to have conversations about whatever's impacting your organization. I probably have a better slant on the accounting and finance side. Kristin's got the non-financial aspects probably more readily at her hands. So feel free to reach out to us. We want to be a resource to the nonprofit community in not just Dane County, but spread throughout the world, country. So feel free to reach out. I'm going to just end here with our Amazon card winner is Josh Davidson from Family Support and Resource Center. So congrats to you, Josh. Lastly, we've got our upcoming topics for Breakfast with Benefits on the 21st of January. Our friends from Park Bank are going to come in and talk about safeguarding your nonprofit. In March, our friends from DaneNet are coming in to talk about Google Workspace and Microsoft 365. And then lastly, in May, Deborah Biddle will be talking DEIB strategies and challenges for 2025. So keep an eye out for those invitations. Please RSVP, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for being here.